Billionaire cracked. My powerful boss number 8. They say the only thing worse than not getting what you want is getting what you want. For so long, I'd wanted Stone Black destroyed. I'd studied its owners, pored over photos of Jackson Stone, and sworn to myself that I would do whatever it took to take him and his company down. Then I met him. Then I fell for him. And then I learned that he wasn't the culprit. But it didn't matter. Stone Black was going to be destroyed anyway. And there I was, wrapped in a towel, still dripping water onto an obscenely expensive carpet. In my hands was a length of rope that had very recently been used to bind me. Across from me stood Jackson Stone, my boss, his gaze cutting through me like a blade. His eyes, usually calm and unreadable, now reflected doubt creeping through him like poison. I would never. I began, my voice faltering. Normally, Jackson was in complete control of his emotions. He wore his signature mask, a flat, impassive expression that made him impossible to read. It was a mask he'd perfected so well that it had become a part of him. But now the mask was gone. He was furious. He let the phone fall from his hand and crossed the room in 2 steps, stopping directly in front of me. My heart pounded as I thought, is this it? Was I about to be fired and thrown out of his life forever? Wrapped in a towel, no less, by the most gorgeous man I'd ever met, who was also wearing a towel. Jackson reached for the coiled rope in my hands, slipping it free and placing it gently on the carpet. His fingers brushed my arm, trailing upward until they rested on the collar around my neck. Even after all we've been through, you still don't trust me, he said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. I do trust you, I insisted, the words tumbling out of me. It's just how this looks. The files are gone, and I was the one who asked you to come here. You don't trust my feelings for you, he said, his tone soft but sharp as a dagger. You think I'm fickle, that I'll suspect you're lying, that everything between us could end in an instant, even without proof. That softness in his voice hurt more than anger ever could. I heard the pain, and it shredded me. He was right. I'd trusted him to bind me, to suspend me from the ceiling, to lead me blindfolded into rooms, and to send me to a party wearing a buzzing sex toy. But I hadn't trusted him to care for me, to believe in me. I trusted his control, but I didn't trust his heart. Even as the word affection passed through my mind, another shadowed it. Love. Did I love him? And God, did he love me? Jackson stepped closer, his fingers brushing the back of my neck. My hair was still wet, water dripping from our shower together. The nearness of him was intoxicating, a mix of comfort and a thrill that sent shivers up my spine. If you're to be mine, you must trust me, he said, his voice low and steady. We stepped into each other at the same time, his lips finding mine in a kiss that left me breathless. His strong arms wrapped around me, holding me tightly, enclosing me in a warm prison I had no desire to escape. I do, I whispered against his lips, my voice trembling. And I will, sir. He glanced down at the trail of wet footprints I'd left across the floor, and the expanding damp circle where my hair dripped onto the carpet. Tisk, getting the floor wet, he said, tugging softly at my collar. I'll have to do something about that. His lips twitched in a teasing smile. Next time. Without another word, he led me back into the bathroom. We finished drying off in comfortable silence, the tension from earlier still lingering, but softened somehow. I slipped back into the blue dress I'd worn earlier. Practical? Not at all. Sexy? Absolutely. Thankfully, the elevator was enclosed, and Mio was already waiting outside with the Bentley running. We merged into traffic before Jackson finally spoke again. Whoever took those files has the upper hand now. Without the paper trail, I can't stop them. I can't even find them. His voice was heavy, weighed down by something more than just frustration. Despair. What about the computer files? I asked, grasping at straws. There must be copies, electronic trails, something. They've already been altered, he replied, his jaw tightening. The fakes are in place, and there's no digital trail. Whoever this is, a person, a business, they've covered their tracks. They've beaten me. We'll find a way, I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. He didn't respond, lapsing back into silence. Every few minutes he'd check his phone, as though willing it to provide the solution. I watched him, my stomach twisting at the sight of someone so strong looking utterly defeated. Back at the mansion, a locksmith was just finishing up the repairs on the front door under Nadine's supervision. Jackson thanked him and sent Nadine home, insisting she take full paid leave until further notice. Inside the East Wing office where we'd been working, every scrap of paper was gone, along with his computer. I hovered near him like a lost puppy, wanting to comfort him, but unsure how. I clasped his hand, hoping the gesture was enough. First my apartment, now his mansion. Would there ever be anywhere safe? Dinner was roast chicken and vegetables Nadine had prepared earlier. Conversation stayed light. Jackson skillfully redirected any mention of the stolen files or himself, keeping the focus on me. I rambled on about high school crushes, embarrassing teenage escapades, and the time my mom's homemade ginger beer exploded because she'd added too much sugar. Dessert, a heavenly chocolate self-saucing pudding, made us laugh, and for brief moments the tension lifted. Later, after showering together, we slipped into bed. The room was dark and quiet, and Jackson kissed me softly, holding me close. I wore a flimsy nightgown, nothing underneath, and when our kisses deepened, I slid the fabric upward, exposing myself to him. His fingers found their way to my heat, stroking slowly, expertly. I reached for him, desperate to feel him, but every time I tried, he moved out of reach, holding my arms and teasing me until I was nearly mad with frustration. When I couldn't take it anymore, I twisted free, pulling his boxers down in one swift motion. He grinned in the dark, but I didn't wait. I climbed on top of him, sliding down onto his cock in one smooth, deliberate motion. A moan escaped me as he filled me, my nightgown slipping off and forgotten. I was completely exposed, overwhelmed with lust and the sensation of him beneath me. His hands gripped my hips, guiding me as I moved, matching my rhythm. I braced my hands on his chest, pressing into him as I rocked my hips back and forth. But soon, I arched my back, running my fingers through my hair, pushing it away from my flushed face. Jackson's breathing grew heavier beneath me, his control slipping. "Oh fuck," he groaned, his hands tightening on my hips. I could feel him starting to lose himself, but I slowed deliberately, teasing him. Grabbing his wrists, I pinned them beside his head. He could have easily overpowered me, flipped me onto my back, but he stayed still, letting me take control. I sped up, riding him harder, faster, the pressure building as moans escaped my lips. I was loud, uninhibited, groaning and crying out as the tension inside me snapped. My body convulsed, shuddering with release as I felt him come inside me, his warmth flooding me. I let go of his hands, and he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me down onto his chest. For a while we lay there, catching our breath, our bodies slick with sweat and heat. Eventually, I slid off him and turned onto my side. He spooned me, his warmth enveloping me, and I felt his cock pressing against me again. I wriggled my hips against him, and in one smooth motion, he was inside me once more. His movements were slow at first, deliberate, each thrust coaxing soft sighs from my lips. But soon, he gripped my hip with one hand and tangled the other in my hair, pulling me against him as he drove into me harder, faster. This time when we came, it was together, wild and intense, the world narrowing to just the two of us. As we drifted off to sleep, his arms wrapped tightly around me, I felt him still inside me, our bodies perfectly entwined. We stayed like that, safe in each other's hold, as the night carried us into dreams. I woke up in the pitch darkness with an image throbbing in my mind, a box in the back of a dark room. When I'd first started collecting contracts, I'd taken out 3 and hidden them in the back corner of the archives. I had no real reason for this apart from wanting to look at them at my leisure, and not wanting anyone else to find them. Now that the rest of the contracts were gone, those ones might be the last left with Matt Black's signature on them. I turned over to tell Mr. Stone, but the bed was empty. I fumbled for the light, and then saw it was 2 a.m., and yet again I was alone. I was all for my mysterious man coming and going, but sometimes a girl wanted to wake up with her man beside her. I wrapped a robe around me, and padded out into the hallway. I heard the low tones of Mr. Stone's voice, so I followed it and found him in his study, standing before a blazing fire. He finished his call as I appeared in the doorway. "There are more contracts," I blurted out before he could say anything. What do you mean? I explained how I'd taken 3 contracts out and hidden them in a back of the archives. Mr. Stone crossed the room in 2 steps and kissed me. We need to retrieve them immediately. Every little piece of evidence we can keep is vital. Meet me downstairs in 10 minutes. We rushed off to our respective rooms to dress. I grabbed a pair of jeans, a t-shirt and a jacket. I met Mr. Stone downstairs. He took me by the hand and led me off towards the back of the mansion, and then down a corridor I'd never walked down. It went to an elevator that took us 1 floor down and opened into an underground garage filled with many bright and shiny cars. Is that the James Bond car? I said as he rushed me along towards a black SUV that was parked on the far wall. One of them, he replied. We got into the SUV, and Mr. Stone drove us out the exit, which was cleverly hidden around the side of the mansion. Many hidden rooms, huh? I said. There's a lot more than that, he said and winked before putting his foot down. We raced through the city, only having to stop once at a red light. The rest of the time the traffic gods smiled on us, and we zipped through green after green. As we drove, Mr. Stone told me about some more transactions he'd found, and his suspicions that there had been payments going to overseas shell companies. So Mr. Black is taking the money for himself? I asked as we arrived out the front of Stone Black. I think he could be paying some people he definitely doesn't want to be in business with. I hope not, for his sake. We entered the building and descended to the archives. The lights flickered on automatically, and I quickly led Mr. Stone to where I'd hidden the contracts. I pulled open the box, half expecting to find it empty, but they were still there. He grabbed them and flicked through, his smile getting bigger with each page. I am so happy you came into my life, he said, grinning down at the contract. Wow. Me too, I answered. Not my best work, but hey, it was the middle of the night. I need to go upstairs for a moment. Let's go. He folded the contracts into his jacket before leading the way out. I felt my spirits rising. Finally, some good news. This web that Mr. Black had woven was big and complicated, and from what I'd seen so far, it was going to be difficult to work out, but seeing Mr. Stone happy at finding these final contracts made me feel things could work out. We reached the top floor, Mr. Stone striding across my office to his like a man possessed. He pushed the heavy doors open, and then stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into the back of him. Mr. Black was sitting behind his desk. Stay behind me, Mr. Stone whispered. Mr. Black looked up from the computer as we entered, and smiled like he was at a party. So good to see you both. Good work, Delilah. What? You brought Jackson here for me and the contracts too. Thank you. I'm not working with him, I protested to Mr. Stone. He just nodded in reply. What are you doing here? Asked Mr. Stone. This is half my company too. He must have seen me glance up at the roof. Don't worry, I've disabled the security cameras. And I don't have a gun. Good, then I can break your fucking nose, Mr. Stone replied. You could try, but then there is the matter of the pyromaniac here. Seems she burned down Stone Pharma. And can you believe, a few other places as well. Then she kept souvenirs in her apartment. Don't drag her into our problem, Matt. She's innocent. I don't care. Give me the contracts or she goes to jail forever. Mr. Black suddenly shouted, leaping up from the chair. We can pay off the money. I'll help you. Then we'll split up the business and go our separate ways. You don't have to do this. Or, you can pay off the money. We'll split up the business and you'll leave with nothing. We have thousands of people working for us. They have mortgages and families. Don't you care? Mr. Black laughed and rolled his eyes. Oh please, Jackson. You don't think your pile of money is pure as the driven snow, do you? You remember those kids sleeping next to the machine, right? Which room of your mansion do you think their blood money bought you? We ended that, Mr. Stone said, gritting his jaw. You didn't have the stomach for what had to be done, so you looked away while I did what we had to. Are you pretending that you didn't know anything about poor little Bedford? What was Mr. Black talking about? Mr. Stone had sworn to me that he had nothing to do with what had happened. I knew that you were an untrustworthy snake. My error was in believing that you could become a better man. I am the better man and now I'm going out on my own. How much will it take? Mr. Stone asked. Everything. Have you set it up? Mr. Stone's voice was a flat monotone. It's just a neat little split and swap. You know how it's done. Mr. Stone nodded and sat down behind his desk. He dropped the contracts beside him. Mr. Black stepped out of arm's reach. You don't have to do this. I couldn't let this happen. He was going to give it all up for me? Trust me, Mr. Stone said. He drew out the pause. I do. Blah blah, get it done, Mr. Black sneered. Mr. Stone tapped his keyboard, and then his phone buzzed. Mr. Black checked it before handing it over to him. He tapped the phone, and then let out a sigh before standing up and walking over to me. Just wait a moment, please, Mr. Black said, holding up his hand. His phone buzzed and he began tapping away. This is what it took to destroy a company. To strip it all away from Mr. Stone and give it to Mr. Black? We're done. You can go. But remember, I have the little pyromaniac's evidence, just in case you think of doing anything stupid. Oh, don't look so concerned, he said to me. The rich hardly ever go to jail. He'll pay some fines, bankrupt some businesses, but at night he'll still be sleeping in that ridiculous mansion of his with your mouth wrapped around his tiny dick. Fuck you. I know you want to, but I don't fuck whores. Mr. Stone turned around, fury in his face. You're a fool. I was willing to help you, but you're not going to talk to Delilah like that. Oh, that true love thing again, is it, Jackson? You know she wanted to fuck me, just like all your other girlfriends. This is getting boring though. Get out of my office. Maybe you should check all those investors you had lined up. Did you complete your due diligence, I wonder? That was never your style. Too boring, wasn't it? Too busy trying your hardest to fuck everything that moved. Mr. Black glanced down at his phone. I'd check SBU and Richmond Associates. Then move on to Del Fry. Mr. Black's reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a black and silver pistol. I lied. I do have a gun. Stay right where you are. Mr. Stone stepped in front of me, shielding me from the gun. Over his shoulder, I saw the moment it happened as Mr. Black tapped his phone. His face drained of all color except for 2 red spots high on his cheeks. He went so pale I thought he might pass out right then. What did you do? He said. His voice was trembling, and so was the arm holding the gun. Only what you taught me, Mr. Stone said. By the way, we have your men who broke into my house. There were tracking dots on those papers. You really should pay more attention to what we actually make in this business. Mr. Black waved the gun towards the computer. Undo it. Put it back. You know it doesn't work like that. Put the gun down. Undo it or I'll put a fucking bullet in her head. Mr. Stone was fast, I knew that. He was quiet too. But I'd never seen anything like this. One moment he was in front of me, and the next he was grabbing Mr. Black. A shot went off, an impossibly large explosion, and wooden chunks flew out of the door. But Mr. Black didn't get another chance. I heard the sound of breaking bone, a meaty crunch that echoed across the room as Mr. Stone broke his nose and knocked him out in one blow. Delilah, there are handcuffs in the drawer, Mr. Stone said. He kicked the pistol away from the unconscious Black and turned him over, pulling his hands behind his back. I rushed over to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Eep, a vibrator. For some reason I found this incredibly hilarious and started laughing even as I opened the next drawer up and found the handcuffs. I gave them to Mr. Stone, who was watching me with an amused look on his face. He snapped them on Mr. Black, and at the sound of the metal clicking shut, I burst into a fresh round of laughter. Do you want the vibrator too? I could barely speak, I was laughing so hard. Mr. Stone turned his business partner over onto his side and made sure he was breathing before walking over to me. I was gripping the edge of his desk, laughing so much that tears were streaming down my face. He took hold of me and pulled me into his chest, and in that moment, my laughter turned to crying. Shoo, he said, stroking my hair. I don't know why I was laughing, I said. I couldn't have done this without you. Let's go. He led me out of his office and into the elevator. We reached the lobby just in time to see the police arrive. Mr. Stone let them in and began to explain what happened. It took a long time, but he never let go of my hand. Not even for a second. Asterisk. It was nearing dawn by the time we returned to the mansion. The police had hauled Mr. Black away, and in a few hours Mr. Stone would have to go to the police station to hand over more evidence. There had been more cameras in Mr. Stone's office than Mr. Black had known about, and the whole thing had been captured in glorious high-definition full color. We went to Mr. Stone's study. I was wrapped in a red blanket, sitting by the crackling fire. He handed me a coffee, and I took a sip and then breathed out. "Your coffee has some brandy in it," he explained, pouring some into his own cup. "My brandy has some coffee in it," I said, taking another sip. I felt the warmth down my throat and spreading through my body. Sometime during the long wait with the police I'd calmed down. Maybe that was why they always took so long. Just to make sure no one was going to keel from shock the second they walked away. Mr. Stone sat down on the chair facing me, our knees almost touching, and sipped his coffee. "Without you, I could never have done it," he said. "What is it? And what did I do?" Mr. Stone laughed and then took my hand. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I suspected that Black had bugged my house, so I could only say what I wanted him to hear. Otherwise, I would have told you the moment I saw your amazing diagram. Of the companies? That was it. I'd been searching so hard for the links, and you had drawn it all up in black and white. I'd had some evidence myself, and had various shell companies in place trying to draw out more information, but it was you that helped me see it clearly. So all that stuff on the computer with the split cell. He'd set up some stock trades on my behalf. I don't know if he intended for me to put them through, or maybe he just wanted to rub it in when we arrived. But I already had my pieces in order, and as soon as I put through what he wanted, mine kicked into gear and destroyed everything he'd done. I gulped down a mouthful of my mostly brandy coffee, feeling muscles I didn't know were tense relax one by one. "So you didn't really give the company away for me then?" "I did. If I had even one little bit of that wrong, then he'd have everything, and I'd have nothing. I was prepared for that. I'd rather have you than every bit of money I've ever seen. You're one sneaky, underhanded, gorgeous bastard is what you're saying?" He laughed and lifted his cup to mine before his expression became serious. What he was saying about Bedford, I didn't know, not one bit of it, but it was still my fault. I've known for years that he liked to play on the other side of the line, out where the law gets very gray. I was totally committed to our business, even to the point of ignoring what my heart was telling me. I could have looked into Stone Pharma years ago. I should have, and because I didn't, it ended up ruining Bedford. I'm sorry, and I will fix it. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I felt the words "I love you" trembling on my tongue. "Did you know he'd be there?" I finally said. "No. I thought by sounding so broken down, so defeated, that he'd make a move. That was just a coincidence. Good or bad, I'm not sure. I never would have put you in danger." He paused and we sipped our drinks, the silence stretching out between us. "What do you see when you look at me?" he asked. I felt I was teetering on a knife edge. Should I say I saw the raw heart of him? I took a breath and decided to tell the truth. "I see a man who was hurt, destroyed, and then he put himself back together and covered himself with iron and a wall of ice so he couldn't be hurt again. It has taken many years for this man to trust again." "You see a lot," Mr. Stone said softly. He bit his lip as though thinking of something, and I suddenly realized he was nervous. He had rushed at a man holding a gun, and now he was nervous here with me? "I have something else to say, to ask. Would you close your eyes?" I closed them, relaxing against the sofa. He took our cups and placed them on the side table. In the quiet, I heard the fire's low crackling, the wind outside rushing through the trees, and the distant sound of the waves thudding on the shore. I could hear all this, but not my silent man. I strained my ears, but all I heard was a faint rustle of fabric on fabric. "Hold out your hand," Mr. Stone whispered from directly in front of me. Although I knew it was coming, I almost jumped out of my skin. I opened my hand and felt him press something into my palm. I opened my eyes and looked down at the tiny battered golden heart sitting in my hand. It was tarnished with age but still beautiful. My grandfather gave this to my grandmother, and she wore it every day of her life. When she died, I inherited it along with a very stern letter from her telling me that our hearts are made to be hurt. They're made to be battered and bruised, but we must still take them out into the world until we find someone who will care for our heart and protect it. She saw what no one else saw. He swallowed and I saw he was trembling. "When I met you, Delilah, I was broken. Parts of me were missing, because I'd locked them up inside me. And then you. I trusted you with my heart. I trusted you with my secrets. I never thought I'd find anyone I could give my heart to. I felt tears prickling in the corners of my eyes. I couldn't look away from Mr. Stone, Jackson Stone, the man I loved, but had never admitted I loved. Please care for my heart, he said and reached into his pocket. He pulled a small black box out and opened it in front of me to reveal a ring set with a cluster of diamonds. I love you. Will you do me the honor of marrying me? Time froze and my breath caught in my throat. I realized I was shaking, just as he was. To marry this man, to be his and for him to be mine. I slid off the sofa and onto my knees in front of him, holding the tiny golden heart in my hand. I kissed him with all the passion in my body. I kissed him like the world was ending, and this was the last minute. I kissed him, and he kissed me back. Our kisses became a hug, our bodies pressed together, my breath hitching in my throat. I love you. Yes, yes, I will, I said to him when we finally pulled apart. He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto my finger. I looked down at the ring and saw the diamonds were red in the firelight. Then I looked at Jackson and saw that my tears had landed in wet circles on his shirt. He looked down at the damp fabric and then grinned at me. I guess I'll have to take this off, he said. He tore his shirt off in one swift move, causing my heart to leap in shock. Then he reached into the edge of the fire and picked up a tiny piece of dead coal. He touched it against my shirt before throwing it back in the fire. Oh no, I guess you'll have to take that off, he said. We stood up together, the blanket falling to the floor quickly followed by my shirt. As Mr. Stone kissed me, a sudden odd thought zipped through my mind. I hadn't been back to my apartment in days, and I'd left some dishes in the sink, and I'd bought Mr. Stone at the bachelor auction. I giggled at the thought of him washing them, glowering at me and counting down the minutes until midnight, when he'd no doubt smack my ass red. What are you laughing about? The idea of you cleaning my apartment, I replied, my hand on his belt. I'll have you know I look quite good in a maid outfit. Me too, I said and dropped his pants to the floor. He laughed, and then swept me up into his arms, causing me to squeal. The coffee had too much brandy in it, but that wasn't what was causing my head to spin. I was going to marry Jackson Stone. He was mine, and I was his. Asterisk. 3 months later. In the end, it hadn't taken long for the accountants and police to pull Black's mess apart. There were layers upon layers like an onion, but once you sliced it with a sharp knife, it fell into pieces. All the sham companies, the fake investors and levels upon levels of deception toppled down around him. Black had applied for bail and got it before fleeing, making it all the way to the border of Paraguay before being caught with a fake passport and wearing a fake nose to cover his broken one. Now he was awaiting extradition and using what was left of his money on expensive lawyers. His claim that the rich rarely went to jail definitely wasn't going to come true in his case. As the investigation into Black progressed, skeletons came out of closets with surprising frequency. The men who broke into Jackson's mansion flipped on Black incredibly fast. Then deceived investors from side scams he'd been running appeared from everywhere. But the biggest surprise was a man who came forward to identify himself as a provocateur in the Stone Pharma protests that had resulted in the building burning down and a janitor dying. He wasn't the one who threw the Molotov, but he named names and had kept evidence that clearly tied Black to the illegal dumping, the fire, and the subsequent threats and harassment that had occurred. With that revelation, the threat of me being hauled off to jail finally vanished. The weight I'd been carrying for years lifted away. Hashtag 191 million turned out to be the amount Mr. Black owed to a syndicate of very scary men. Some were Russian, a few Chinese, some from Saudi Arabia, and every single one of them on various government watch lists for organized crime. They were after Black personally, which was a relief, and Jackson assured me they wouldn't kill Black over the money, because they wanted it back. Months and months ago, I had joined the records department with the intention of destroying Stone Black. And now it was. Jackson had been clever enough in the months before Black made his play to split things up, move them around, and begin to unwind the damage he'd done. Thanks to that, and the flurry of transactions that had kicked into effect the moment Jackson gave it all up for me, things were going to be okay under the new Stone Corporation. Stone Black didn't escape without harm though. Hundreds of millions of dollars were missing, but Jackson refused to see a single person lose their job because of black. He'd used his personal wealth to cover the shortfall, and as he explained a week before our wedding, he was still a billionaire but now just half the billionaire I was before. He may have been half the billionaire he was, but he was 1,000 times any man I'd ever known. It wasn't going to be easy, but the work to clean up Bedford had already begun. It would take years, but with the new technology provided by the Stone Corporation, eventually Bedford would thrive again. None of this was on my mind though today. We'd been married in the grounds of his mansion. Jackson telling me he'd swapped the very naughty statues in the maze over to innocent ones just in case any children ran in there. Now the party was over, and the guests all gone, and we were finally alone. He had carried me over the threshold of his dungeon more than once, but never before as his wife. He stopped in the doorway with me over his shoulder. I had a view of his perfectly formed ass and not much else. "Move it along," I called out. He swatted me on the backside and I laughed. "We're not in there yet, sir." He stepped across the threshold and set me down before slamming the door shut behind us. I jumped at the sound and nearly said something, but then I saw the mocking look on his face. When I was in here, I was his to do with as he pleased. Would I disobey? When he finally saw I was holding my tongue, he grabbed me and kissed me like it was the last kiss of his life. When we broke apart, I felt like I was going to topple over. I was so dizzy. I had seen this amazing man almost every day for the last 3 months, and yet I still couldn't believe he was really mine. I was married to him. He undid the top button of his shirt and flickered an eyebrow at me, daring me to laugh. I stifled a giggle. I knew this game. He undid another button and wriggled his other eyebrow, and I had to bite my tongue and look down so I wouldn't laugh. "Delilah," Jackson said. I looked up just in time to see him poke his tongue out. I laughed and clapped my hand over my mouth. He stepped closer to me. "Oh, and you were doing so well," he whispered, stroking his finger down my neck. "You bastard, Mr. Stone." "I love you, Mrs. Stone." "I love you too, sir." I felt a rush of heat across my body as his hand trailed down my back, and then up again. "Turn around," he said. I tilted my neck and turned around as he undid the diamond choker wrapped around my throat. Then his hands slid down to my wedding dress, and he began to unbutton me from it. It was sleek, sexy, and elegant thanks to Alma and the girls, but it also had approximately 1.4 million hidden buttons, hooks, and other wedding dress tricks to make it look so good. But Jackson was skilled with his hands, as I'd well learned, and in no time at all he'd loosened it. I stepped forward and turned around, allowing the dress to slide to the floor. I stepped out of it, and as demurely as a girl now wearing nothing more than sheer white stockings and high heels could, picked up my dress and draped it over a side bench. Jackson watched me the whole time, looking like a wolf ready to consume a meal. His eyes burned, and I shivered in anticipation as I stood before him. "Close your eyes," he commanded. I closed them and, like every time before, tried to hear him move around. I heard one footstep, and that was it. I was getting better, but the man was still silent and fast. I gently bit the inside of my cheek. There was no way he'd surprise me this. "Open them," I gasped as I felt his hands on my throat. Again he'd done it. When he removed his hands, I felt the collar he'd wrapped around me. I turned around and saw it was pitch black leather, a band of night, inlaid with diamonds that twinkled like stars. "It's too much, sir," I protested, stroking my fingers across it. It was so soft and already warming against my skin. "I could give you the world and everything in it, and it wouldn't be enough to show you how I feel," Jackson replied. I turned around and kissed him, desperate for his body, desperate for his whole self. I was tugging at his suit, forgetting myself entirely. Jackson stepped back and held my hands between his. I was panting and blew out a breath in frustration. I could feel my clit literally throbbing and beat with my heart. "Wait, little slave," Jackson admonished. He paused long enough to ensure I simply wouldn't jump on his again, and then release my hands. "I have something to show you," he said. He reached into his pocket and must have pressed a button. A panel in the back wall slid down while another moved sideways, disappearing behind another. Pieces moved like an intricate clock as a pitch-black wooden cross emerged. I shivered when I saw the leather cuffs, goosebumps running across me, and felt butterflies fluttering madly in my stomach. Finally, the cross softly clicked into place, the last piece sliding into place. "What kind of craftsman do you have working for you?" I asked, aroused by what was in front of me, but also amazed at the beauty of it all. He bit his lip and gave me that look. "Sir," I added hastily. He took me by the hand and led me across the dungeon before turning me around and lifting my hands above my head as he pushed me back against the cross. He bound each wrist, enclosing it in the leather cuff. "Only the very best. And discreet," Jackson said, a smile playing on his lips. He turned away to a nearby drawer and then returned with a length of rope in one hand, an egg and a bottle of lubricant in the other. I stayed silent as Jackson dabbed a cold dot on my rear entrance. I stayed silent even as it warmed, and I felt heat pulsing through me. I stayed silent as he slipped the egg inside me, and the pleasure magnified. Jackson kept his gaze locked with mine the entire time, and once the egg was inside me, he nodded. "Impressive, but I wonder if you can stay quiet for much longer." He walked away from me with his hands in his pockets, whistling like he was out on an afternoon stroll in the country. He left me there, bound and rapidly overheating on the cross, as I watched his perfectly formed ass walk away from me. He turned around near the door and undid his shirt buttons one by one. When he threw his shirt behind him, I let out a quiet whimper. His body, my God, his body. I had seen it against me, seen it above me, run my hands over it, and felt it pressed against me. But every time I saw the strong muscles of his chest, I wanted to touch them. I wanted to run my lips down from his neck, down his abs and down further still. Jackson undressed, and soon he was naked on the other side of the room. A Greek statue carved from polished marble and brought to life. I couldn't look away from his thick cock. I wanted him inside me. He reached into his jacket that he'd left hanging over a bench, and I saw a glimmer of a silver dot that he pressed into the palm of his hand. "The question is, how close should I come?" he asked. He put out his hand, and then took a step towards me. The instant he crossed some invisible line, the egg inside me throbbed to life. I gasped as the powerful vibrations shot through me. Jackson watched me squirm for a moment before lowering his hand, taking it back over the invisible line. As soon as he did, the egg shut down, leaving me trying to catch my breath. I watched Jackson, trying to keep my eyes on him as he stepped sideways. He moved around the various tables and benches in the room. He stepped over the invisible line, and I gasped in pleasure. Then he stepped back again. A moment later, he came to the bench that he'd first used those months ago, to go down on me with a mouthful of hot tea. We'd used it a few times since. He looked at it, as though considering how to get around it. "The near side or the far side?" Jackson said, smirking at me. The man was the devil. He stepped towards me and halfway around it before stopping. The egg throbbed inside me as Jackson watched. I bit my lip, and then gasped as he took another step towards me. The egg stepped up another level. He was still halfway across the room, and the tiny sex though was going to vibrate my brains out. Jackson took another step towards me, up another level, and I couldn't stay silent. I began to whimper. And another step. And another. I smelt his scent and realized I had my eyes closed. I forced them open and found Jackson in front of me, watching me writhe on the cross. Our eyes met, and in an instant he was against me. He pulled my legs up and slid his full length into me, the egg vibrating like crazy still. I moaned as he filled me. The egg was small but powerful, and between it and Jackson inside me, I felt completely filled. Caught between two powerful forces, my hands bound, unable to move. Jackson began to thrust in and out of me, his hands on my ass, holding my legs up. With each movement his cock pushed up inside of me, feeling impossibly large, and my clit throbbed in time. I felt the egg change pattern, now pulsing on and off quickly, and this was far more intense than I could have ever imagined. Jackson nipped my earlobe, and then the side of my neck, and I found myself begging and shouting yes sir over and again. "Come now," he commanded, and I was helpless against it. I came, my body pinned between his and the cross, pinned between his cock and the egg. I came, feeling like every muscle in my body was quivering in pleasure. Jackson didn't stop though. There was no relief from this pleasure, no plateau to drift down from, and then climb back up. He kept fucking me like a mad barbarian. the egg buzzing inside my ass, and I came again, tears appearing at the corners of my eyes. But again there was no respite. Jackson kept fucking me through my orgasm, pushing me to another, never letting me come down. At some point I heard his breathing quicken, and my body respond to his. I was long past counting or even thought. He controlled me, my pussy. My body was his, and I was an instrument to be played. I was a slave to be used. I was his absolutely. My pleasure peaked and I gasped again, and then I felt him come inside me. He grunted, a wild animalistic sound, and pounded his cock into me as he came. Finally he slowed and then stopped, his full length inside of me, our bodies joined. Thankfully the egg slowed and stopped too. We stayed like this for some time, gently kissing and recovering our breath before Jackson stepped away from me, leaving me with my eyes closed, floating in bliss. He was back a moment later with a warm washcloth. He wiped it over my body before finally carefully sliding the egg out of my body. I sighed as it went, feeling my muscles throbbing, exhausted. Jackson unbuckled my arms and despite the marathon of fucking he'd just accomplished, picked me up and carried me out. Soon we were showering, warm and content against each other. And soon after that he was sliding into bed, while I removed the thin chain around my neck that held the small battered gold heart. I hung it on the jewelry box and slipped into bed beside him. He wrapped an arm around me as I nestled into his chest. In the darkness the room was lit only by the distant stars. I saw the diamonds on my wedding ring pick up the faint light as I moved my hand to hold Jackson's. "I love you, Delilah," he said, floating somewhere near the edge of sleep. I glanced over at the jewelry box and the faint outline of the heart that hung there. Jackson's heart, that I would carry with me and protect forever, just as he would mine. He may have been asleep when I answered, but it didn't matter. He knew I loved and trusted him, and would the rest of my life. "I love you, Jackson," I whispered and felt myself drifting away into a blissful sleep. He would be there tomorrow, and I would tell him again tomorrow. And the day after that. And after that. And after that. The end.